If you're new to JavaScript or just new to programming in general, you may be asking yourself, why exactly do I need functions? Why can't I just write everything within the global scope? I mean, it's there, right? Well, there's quite a few reasons why you wouldn't want to write everything within the global scope, and there's quite a few good reasons for using functions. So today we're going to go over some of those reasons. I'm going to show you a real world example of exactly why we should be using functions more often. And where exactly you should be using them versus where exactly you shouldn't be using them. And in quite a few, I'm going to be talking about JavaScript in general, because I am, for the most part, a JavaScript developer. But there are other programming languages that you're required to write it inside of a function or a class or something of the sort. There is no, per se global scope. So today we're going to go over some of those reasons on why we should be using functions, and why we should consider using functions a lot more when we are programming. So let's get right into it. So here I have a basic HTML file. It's just basic boilerplate code, and I've got a div with a class of root here. I've got an empty script file over here, and it's being included right here, and we're deferring it so that it will run after the body is loaded. Functions are like I said, very a simple concept, but you may be confused on exactly why you need to use them. So let's look at a basic example of a function and why you should be using it versus just writing it in the global scope. So I've got a very basic piece of code here that all it does is takes two numbers, adds them together, and logs the answer to the console. This right here, this will log 3, and then this function here, called add, just console logs the exact same thing, and whenever it's called, it will also log the answer to the console. So if we save this, we look over to console, we've got 2 3s. They do the exact same thing. So you might be like, well, why do I need the function? It's so many more lines of code if I can just write it all in one line. And well, you would be right for the most part. If this is all you're doing with your code, then you don't really need this function here. This function serves no purpose other than adding lines of code. But that's only true partly. If you are going to be reusing this function, say you want to use this function multiple places, then this becomes a little bit more usable. So if we're just doing this as a one-off thing, we're never going to use it again, it's the only time it's going to be used, and it's a single line of code, then yes, something like this could be used and is used, even in large-scale applications. But the majority of things are done inside of functions, because let's say you have a huge file, a huge program that you're writing that is like 2 or 3,000 lines of code, and this function is used 200 or 300 times within that file. Now, you don't really want to write this 200 or 300 different times. Yes, it is one line of code, but it is a lot longer than just calling the function here, and it is less prone to mistakes, because if I were to be using this multiple times, I may accidentally add something else here. Instead of 1 plus 2, I may say 1 plus 3. Then our answer comes back 4 rather than the expected 3. This is a very simple example, and it's not really useful too much other than right here. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look into exactly why functions are more useful than you may think. So let's say you are creating a video game, and every time an opponent is hit, you want to calculate the amount of damage done to that opponent. And let's say, for example purposes, that we're going to start out at with an HP of 100, and the unalived value means your character is no longer alive, starts out as false, because whenever you start, your character of course is alive. So let's say you have this function here that's going to calculate the amount of damage whenever the opponent is hit, but you also want to check, because your video game is cool, and if you want to in your video game, you want to see if the opponent has more than 50 HP, because if he does, then we're just going to double the damage. I mean, higher HP makes you stronger, so you got to double the damage if you've got more than half HP. So we're going to create this function that allows us to calculate the damage, and then every time that, say, your opponent is hit, you call this function calcDamage. Now, when you first call this function, of course, your HP is set to 100 by default. So if you want, and your default damage value is going to be 1.2. So if our opponent has higher HP than 50, we're going to calculate the damage, and we're going to say calculate the damage as double the damage. So we're going to take damage and set it equal to the current value of damage and multiply it by 2. So now, if your opponent has higher than 50 HP, we are going to double the damage. So if we run this here, you're going to see over here we get 97.6, because we set our HP value originally was set at 100. All right. Our damage value is set at 1.2. All right. And then we're going to do this check here. And say if the value of HP is higher than 50, we're going to set damage equal to the current value of damage times 2. And then down here, we're going to set HP. We're going to take the current value of HP, which is 100 by default, and we're going to set that equal to the current value of HP, and we're going to subtract the damage and save it, resave it into the HP variable, and then we're just going to console log HP. So let's say every time your opponent's hit, your opponent's hit 6 or 7 times. Every time that your opponent's hit, you're going to call this function right here, so we can calculate the damage. So if we save this now, we'll see that every time the opponent's hit, the value goes down just by a little bit. So if we want to reuse this, let's say we want to check to see if you can use health. If your health is lower than 85, then you can use the health pack, which will add 20 HP to your, or 15 HP to your, to yourself. So we can check to see if HP is greater than 85, and if it is, we're gonna say, okay, we can use health pack. All right. Okay. So if our damage, if our current health is, less than 85, then we're gonna say health pack. We can use a health pack is true. So if we want to use a health pack, console.log used health pack. All right. So right now, even though this if statement is in the global scope, it's not being run because we do not have less than 85 HP. But let's say our opponent hit us this many times. If we save that now, we see over here our last damage value was 80, so our opponent can use a health pack. All right. And if they use the health pack, that's going to bring up their or they're bringing up their HP sum. So we're going to set HP. We'll say let health pack value and set that equal to 15. So if we want to use a health pack on ourselves, it will give us 15 HP. So if we want to use a health pack, it'll give us 15 HP, and then we'll take the value of HP and set that equal to HP plus health pack value. All right. And then we can console.log HP. But my point here is every time that you want to reuse this function here, you need to call it again, which if you weren't using a function, you'd have to write all of this code over again every single time that you call this function. Now, what if, per se, we don't exactly know the value of damage? Let's say we're using different items that could range from 1 damage to 10 damage. Well, we can take damage out of there, and we can set that to a value that is by default 0. All right, and then we can say, okay, we are going to be using a item that is 5 HP of damage. All right, and this is where arguments and parameters come in to functions. So a argument and a parameter are two different things, but they mean the same thing for the most part. Not really, but kind of. So when you create a function, you use the keyword function, and then you follow that by the function name, however you're going to call it, and then inside of these parentheses you can create parameters. So let's say we want to create a parameter called damage. All right, and every time that we call this function is going to expect a value for damage. So when we call this function here, we can pass in the damage value of 5. And if we call it again, say someone else hit us with a damage of 7, we can then pass in different values depending on what it is that we need to pass in. So these here in the function call are called arguments. And when you pass in an argument to a function, it is then sent up to the function, and this value of damage is set equal to whatever value it was that was passed in. So we have an argument of 7. So this is going to say, okay, we need calc damage. So it's going to take, it's going to go up to where calc damage is, and it's going to say, okay, I need a value called damage. All right, and we're going to pass in that value of 7. So whenever this function is called, it's going to say, okay, we've got this value of damage, and it's going to take this value down here and put it in this variable right here. So now damage is going to equal 7 or 5 or whatever it is that you pass in. So we're going to say if our HP is greater than 50, we're going to set damage equal to the current value of damage and multiply it by 2. So this value here is only usable with inside of this function. So this is what is called function scope. Now you cannot use damage outside of this function. Well, technically you can, because we have damage up here. But if I were to get rid of that, and we have no damage value whatsoever as our default, we can only use damage inside of this function. So when we call this function, it's going to send this value of 5 up to damage, and then damage is now going to equal 5 or 7 whenever we call it, and it can be different every single time we call it. So whenever we run this now, we get, so basically what this did here was it said, okay, calc damage, we're going to call that, we're going to go up here and we're going to put 5 in this place. All right, we're going to check if HP is greater than 50. It checks to see HP, and it sees HP is 100, so it's going to say, okay, that is true. So we're going to say, okay, damage, which is currently equal to 7, we're going to say rewrite this variable and set this value right here inside of this variable. So we're going to take damage here, all right, which is a value of 7, and we're going to multiply that by 2, or value of 5 for the first function call, and we're going to multiply it by 2. So it's going to say, okay, damage is now equal to 10 because our HP is greater than 50. Now it's going to come down here and say, okay, HP is now going to be whatever value HP is. So currently the HP value is 100, and we're going to subtract damage from it. Then it's going to log to the console what the current value saved in HP here is. And it's going to say, okay, so HP is set equal to whatever the current value of HP is, which is 100. And we're going to subtract the damage, which is now equal right here to 10. So we're going to take 100. We're going to replace this HP value here with 100. and we're going to replace this damage value here with 10, because that's the way that they are being saved in their variables. Now we've got a variable of 90 saved here because HP is originally 100 minus 10 for the damage equals 90. So then we're going to console.log HP, which is going to be a value of 90. Then it's going to come past this. All right, so it's going to say, okay, we're done with that. It's going to say, okay, we need calc damage again. So we're going to call calc damage again, and we're going to pass in this value of 7. It's going to replace this damage value of 7 again, or this value of damage with a value of 7. Then it's going to run this function here. It's going to say, okay, HP is HP greater than 50. Well, we can see on our console here, after this value was called, our HP is now equal to 90. So it's going to say, okay, our HP is still greater than 50, so we're going to take the damage and we're going to double it. All right, and then we're going to come down here and we're going to take HP, we're going to save a value in HP and set that equal to whatever the current value of HP is, which is currently 90, and we're going to subtract the damage. So the damage is saved here. We're going to take the current value of damage, which is passed in as 7, multiply that by 2, and we're going to get 14. So we're going to take our value of HP, which is currently now 90, and we're going to subtract damage, which is now 14. So then we're going to console.log whatever the value of HP is now, and we are going to console log that value, and it's going to log out 76. All right, and if we call this one more time, we saved it again, you're going to see that we had another function call of 7. It did the exact same thing. So damage is now 7 again. We are going to say, is HP greater than 50? And it's going to look at this value of 76 and say, yes, it is greater than 50. So we're going to double the damage. All right, and then we're going to say, okay, what is, we're going to save a new value in HP, and we're going to take the current value, and it's going to say, okay, the current value is 76, all right, and it's going to say damage, okay, since we doubled it here, we saved the value of damage times 2 into damage again. It's going to say, okay, the value is 14. Because we doubled the damage, because we are lower than or higher than 50 HP. So it's going to say, okay, so our HP value of 76, we're going to take that and subtract the damage value of 14, and then we're going to log out the console the current HP value, which is now 62. And then once we call this function here, it's gonna come down to this here, and it's gonna say, okay, is HP less than 85? And then it's gonna check the value of HP, which it's gonna see, okay, yes, it is 62. So we are able to use a health pack, which we set health pack to true. And we're going to say, okay, HP is now equal to HP plus the health pack value, which up here we defined health pack value as 15. So it's going to take the current value of HP, which is 62, and it's going to add 15 to that. All right, and it's going to save that value inside of HP. All right, and then we're going to console log that health pack was used, and we're going to now update our HP value, which is now going to be 77, because we took the current value of 62 and added right here health pack value, which was 15. All right, now this is a basic example of why you would want to use a function. So let's switch gears a little bit and look at the return statement. Now, the return statement is a very, very useful tool, especially when you're working with functions a lot, which if you are making reusable code, you're probably going to be using functions quite a bit. Now, if function scope says that anything that is defined within a function has to stay inside of that function. You cannot use that those variables that are saved in or defined inside of that function outside of it. So if I have a function called return something and I define dogs and set that equal to 25, I am not allowed, I'm not able to access dogs outside of that function. So if I save this and I get a reference error saying dogs is not defined because dogs is defined inside of this function. But what if we wanted to get something out of a function? That is where the return statement is going to come into play. The return statement will return something, will return one thing out of that function. So if I were to say I want to return dogs, all right, I can say, okay, I'm defining dogs inside of this, setting it equal to 25. And I'm going to return dogs out of this function. So anytime I call that function, it's going to come to this function. It's going to say, okay, dogs is equal to 25. And it's going to see this return statement. And it's going to say, okay, we're going to return whatever value is in dogs. So it's going to be like, okay, I'm going to go back down here, and whatever, it's going to basically replace this function call with whatever was returned. So if I want to console log dogs outside of this function, I'm going to need to return dogs from inside of the function. So if I want to console.log dogs, I'm going to call this function inside of the console.log, and it is going to return the current value saved in dogs. So if I save this now, we can see that it console.log 25, and that's because whenever it hits this return statement, it's going to say, okay, we are going to send back to you whatever value is here. So dogs is equal to 25, so this here is going to be 25. So it's going to say, okay, here you go, here's your return value, and then it's going to basically just replace this function call with dogs, or the value of dogs to be more precise. This does not allow you to still use dogs outside of the function, but it does allow you to get the value outside of the function. So functions can also be useful for making sure that your code, it also allows you to use the same variable multiple times inside of multiple functions. So let's say I have this function here that's got dogs in it, and let's say I've got another function that return something else, all right, and I'm going to say, okay, we're going to say let dogs equal 50, all right, and then I'm going to return dogs, all right. Now normally if you say up here let cat equal 12, and if you say let cat equal 15, it's going to give you an error because it's going to say cat has already been declared right here. Because this is within the scope, these are both within the same scope. But with functions, I can define dogs inside of this function, and I can define dogs inside of this function. It's like its own little wrapper that only everything within this function stays within this function unless you return something outside of this function. And even then, it just gives you a value, not any variables. So if I were to say I want to console.log return something, and I want to console.log return something else, it will allow me to do that. And what it'll do is it'll call this function return something and say, okay, let dogs equal to 25, and it's gonna say, okay, we're gonna return dogs back to you. So it's gonna take the value in dogs, which is 25, and it's gonna say, here is your return value, and it's gonna replace this return something with the value stored in dogs, which is 25. And then it's gonna say, okay, that one's done. We're gonna go to the next one. Now it's going to say console.log return something else. And it's going to say, okay, where's that function at? It's going to go to this function and say, okay, let dogs equal 50. I don't see dogs anywhere else inside of this function, so we can declare dogs inside of this function. And it's going to say, okay, we're going to return back to you the value of dogs, which is 50. Whatever's inside of this has no idea what's inside of this. It's like a little box that surrounds each function. Each function is like a little box that surrounds each one of them, and by returning something outside of a function, you can get the value out of the function, but just a value. And when you return something, it automatically ends the function call. So whenever you see return, that anything after that is going to say let eat equal true, and it's gonna say unreachable code detected, because this code comes after the return statement, and the return statement just completely ends the function call and returns whatever you tell it to return. So this code here will never run. That's why it's saying unreachable code, because this code will never run, because this return will say, okay, we're done with this function, we're going to send this back, and that's it. All right. So those are functions. There is a lot more to functions, and I urge you to try them out. Give them a try, and try to embrace them a little bit, because they are very, very widely used. They're basically like variables, but longer form variables. And they make coding a lot easier and a lot more readable. If you start writing code inside of the global scope and you give the code to somebody, and they're going to be like, okay, what does all of this do? Functions make it a lot more readable and a lot more reusable. That way, like up here, you don't have to, every time you want to calc damage, you don't have to rewrite this entire function over and over and over again. You just create this call. Same thing with the return statement. If you want to get a value outside of a function, all you have to do is say return and then the value that you want to return. One other thing, if you want to return multiple things, just since functions are, you can only return one thing from a function. It doesn't matter what it is, but you can only return one thing from a function. So if we want to say let cats equal 15, we can't say, okay, return dogs, cats. All right, it's going to say this code is unreachable because it's going to return dogs, and that's the entire statement. But if you wanted to return multiple things out of a function, you could do this, where you return an array. Now, when you return an array, it's just going to return the whole array. So if you look over here, it will return both values for you, but technically it's one return because it's just returning the entire array rather than trying to return two separate values. So that is going to be about it for functions. Functions are very simple, but can be very complex to understand when you're first starting out. Trust me, I would know. But once you start getting used to them, once you start using them a lot more, you'll find that you absolutely love using functions, and they make coding so much easier. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment if you have any questions. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. And let me know how your programming goes, if you like the functions or if you need a little bit more understanding of functions, because they can be complicated. So make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe. I will continue uploading more videos like this. And I hope to see you all in the next one.